Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Terminal 7 at New York International Airport buzzed with activity. Suitcases rolled across the shiny floors, announcements were made, and hundreds of passengers milled about their boarding gates. Among them, Olivia Johnson, a black woman in her 30s, walked with effortless elegance. Her perfectly tailored beige coat, leather shoes, and shoulder bag spoke of a confident person who left nothing to chance. A few feet away from her stood Madison Clark, a condescending-looking blonde flight attendant whose smirk and narrow eyes betrayed a quick judgment. Madison had already formed her opinion of Olivia before even greeting her. One look at her name and skin tone had been enough for her to decide, in her mind, to treat this passenger properly. As the line moved along, Madison let out an exaggerated sigh as she watched Olivia present her first-class ticket. Her fingers tapped nervously on the counter, as if Olivia's patience was about to be tested. The other passengers, preoccupied with their own affairs, didn't immediately notice the beginning of a silent confrontation that would quickly turn into a public humiliation. Olivia, aware of the growing attention, remained calm. Her brown eyes fixed Madison with a quiet intensity. She knew some people were blinded by their prejudices, but she was prepared to face the situation with dignity and control. What Olivia didn't let on, however, was the secret she carried with her. This trip wasn't simply a robbery, but a display of power that no amount of arrogance could extinguish. The stage was set. What seemed like a simple boarding incident would soon become a shock for everyone, especially Madison Clark. The flight to Los Angeles was full. Passengers were milling about, some glued to their phones, others eager to find their seats before the overhead compartments filled. The boarding gate buzzed with whispers and hurried footsteps. Olivia Johnson waited calmly in the priority line. She glanced at her discreet watch, a Swiss timepiece with a black leather strap. She wasn't in a hurry, nor was she nervous. She traveled often, and this boarding ritual had become a formality for her. At the counter, Madison Clark, the impeccably dressed blonde hostess, scanned the tickets with a smile on her face. Yet, as soon as she saw Olivia approaching, her expression subtly changed. Her lips stretched into a tight pout, and her eyes raked her up and down, assessing her appearance with that mixture of contempt and curiosity typical of those who judge before they even know. Boarding pass and identity document, Madison launches in a dry tone. Olivia calmly handed her documents. The machine beeped clearly, Seat 2A, first class. Still, Madison frowned, as if something was wrong. "Are you sure this is the right ticket?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Absolutely," Olivia replied without raising her voice. Madison, refusing to give in, took her time examining the passport and ticket. She turned the document over once, twice, 3 times, to the point of annoying the passengers behind her who were beginning to grow impatient. "First class," Madison repeated with a wry smile. "Well, that's surprising." The implication was clear. Olivia held his gaze for a few seconds, without a word. Her silence was more powerful than a scathing retort. She quietly retrieved her papers and walked toward the boarding bridge. Madison, for her part, shook her head slightly as if to say, "We've seen it all." But what the flight attendant didn't know was that this surprising passenger would soon teach her a lesson she would never forget. The jetway carpet led directly to the plane. The air conditioning blew gently as Olivia walked, her measured steps echoing in the narrow space. She entered the cabin and, as expected, flight attendant Madison Clark was waiting for her again to assist the first-class passengers. Olivia looked up at the illuminated sign, 2A, her seat. A wide, beige leather seat near the window, already prepared with a neatly folded blanket and a glass of sparkling water. She calmly placed her bag on the next seat, but no sooner had she started than Madison appeared beside her, arms crossed. "Excuse me," Madison said in a honeyed but tense voice, "that I think there was a mistake." Olivia stared at her calmly. "A mistake?" "Yes," Madison said, raising her chin slightly, "this seat is reserved for first class." The tone was heavy with innuendo. Several passengers already seated discreetly looked up from their tablets or newspapers. The atmosphere was becoming charged. Olivia took a slow breath, then pulled out her boarding pass again. Seat 2A. First class. You can check. Madison took the ticket with an exasperated sigh, scanned it on her tablet, and immediately saw the name, Olivia Johnson, first class confirmed. But instead of apologizing, she narrowed her eyes. Well, sometimes, you know, these things happen. Maybe an upgrade was given in error. A murmur rippled through the cabin. A businessman frowned, a mother exchanged an indignant look with her teenage daughter. Olivia, however, remained unperturbed. No, she replied calmly, this is not a mistake. I bought this ticket. Madison forced a smile, but her next words were even sharper. Madam, I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but are you sure you can afford such a ticket? The sentence, delivered with venomous gentleness, came as a shock. The cabin froze. Some passengers looked away, embarrassed by the stewardess's disguised brutality. Others, on the contrary, waited for Olivia's reaction, intrigued by the mounting tension. Olivia remained impressively calm. She put her sunglasses back on, crossed her legs, and sat down in seat 2A with calculated slowness. Her attitude clearly said, I have nothing to prove. In a firm but polite voice, she simply said, I'm exactly where I need to be. And for the first time, it was Madison who lost her confidence for a moment. Madison, vexed by Olivia's serenity, felt her professional facade cracking. Every measured gesture, every calm word from this woman put her more on the defensive. She couldn't accept losing face in front of the passengers, especially not in front of someone she considered, in her distorted mind, inferior. She moved a little closer, tilted her head and said in a low voice, but loud enough for the passengers in the neighboring seats to hear. You know, some people always exaggerate their importance. But hey, if you insist. She then turned to a fellow steward and said sharply, Can you check if there was a booking error for seat 2A? The young steward, feeling uneasy, consulted the electronic tablet, then confirmed without hesitation. No, everything is correct. Mrs. Johnson is indeed in first class. Madison clenched her jaw, her fixed smile becoming almost painful. But instead of bowing, she continued. Perfect, but madam, I would ask you to remain discreet. Our first-class guests are accustomed to a certain standard. A voice then bursts out from the next seat, occupied by an old man in a gray suit. This is a disgrace. This lady has done nothing wrong. Leave her alone. A woman further away adds. Exactly. You're humiliating him in front of everyone. Stares gathered on Madison. Some passengers already took out their phones to film the scene. Olivia, still seated, calmly watched the flight attendant lose her footing. Then, in a calculated gesture, Olivia removed her sunglasses and looked straight into Madison's eyes. Her eyes shone with quiet authority. You seem to be trying so hard to make me feel like I belong, and yet, you're the one who doesn't. A deathly silence fell over the cabin. Madison blinked, taken aback. The mask of superiority she'd been wearing had cracked. The passengers, hanging on Olivia's every word, knew she hadn't revealed anything yet, but that the real lesson was about to come. Madison, already unsettled, tried to regain control. She forced a tight smile, as if she could erase all the accumulated tension with a gesture. Madam, don't take this the wrong way, it's just that we have rules to follow. My duty is to protect the company's image. Olivia raised her eyebrows gently. Her calmness contrasted sharply with the flight attendant's agitation. The passengers, however, held their breath. Phones pointed toward the stage captured every second of this face-off. Olivia crossed her legs, placed her hands elegantly on her knees and said in a clear voice. Protect the company's image? A thin smile stretched her lips. Then she added. I understand you. But maybe you should know that, this company is mine. An abrupt silence fell over the cabin. The only sound was the whir of the air conditioning. Eyes widened, mouths dropped open. Even the flight attendant next to Madison stood there, speechless. "What do you mean, yours?" Madison stammered, her face ashen. Olivia then took a small black card with the airline logo out of her bag. An exclusive executive card, reserved only for members of the executive board. She calmly handed it to Madison. "I'm Olivia Johnson, founder and largest shareholder of this company. You're not protecting my image, you've just tarnished it." A murmur of disbelief shook the cabin. Some passengers applauded spontaneously, others hissed disapprovingly at Madison. The phone cameras focused even more on Olivia, who sat in her seat, radiating serene dignity. Madison, on the other hand, turned pale as a sheet. Her voice trembled as she stammered. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. I didn't know." Olivia looked at her coldly. "That's the problem. You didn't try to find out. You only judged." A shudder ran through the cabin. The lesson had been delivered, clear and implacable. Madison felt her legs buckle under the weight of the revelation. The color rose to her cheeks, then faded immediately, leaving her a sickly pale color. She clutched the seat next to her as if for balance. The passengers, however, could not take their eyes off her. Some whispered among themselves. "Unbelievable, she humiliated her own boss. It's sure to be a big deal on social media. She deserves to be fired." Madison tried to compose herself, but her lips were trembling. She leaned slightly toward Olivia and whispered in a pleading voice. "Mrs. Johnson. I apologize. I got carried away. It was a misunderstanding." Olivia held his gaze for a few seconds, without saying a word. Then, with calculated slowness, she answered. "No, Miss Clark. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a judgment. And the worst part is, you did it in uniform, representing my company." The words fell like a guillotine. The passengers nodded in agreement, some nodding, others filming even more intently. Madison wanted to reply, but a passenger, a man in a white shirt sitting in 1C, intervened loudly. "Ms. Johnson, you don't have to put up with this. This woman publicly humiliated you. She must face the consequences." A round of applause erupted in the cabin. Madison took a step back, her eyes filling with tears she was trying to hold back. She had just realized the magnitude of her mistake. This was no longer a simple altercation between a flight attendant and a passenger. This was a scandal waiting to erupt, and her face was now etched into the phones of dozens of passengers. She felt her world crumble. Her career, her reputation, everything had changed in a matter of minutes. Olivia, unperturbed, took a firm but calm tone. "Sit back, Miss Clark. It's going to be a long flight. You'll have time to think about your words." Madison lowered her head, unable to answer, and silently left the row. But in his mind, only one thought resonated: my life just changed forever. The flight had now settled into its rhythm. The first-class passengers sipped their drinks, but the air remained charged with electricity. Everyone glanced discreetly at Olivia from time to time, impressed by the dignity with which she had handled the affront. Madison, on the other hand, wandered the cabin like a shadow. Her salesman's smile was gone. Every gesture seemed mechanical, every word seemed forced. She was no longer the flight attendant in control, she was just a trembling employee, haunted by her own arrogance. Finally, unable to bear the weight of the silence and the stares any longer, Madison tentatively approached seat 2A. She bowed slightly, her hands clutching her notebook. "Mrs. Johnson. I wanted to say again that I'm sorry. I acted in an unacceptable manner. It was not worthy of my office." Olivia looked up from her book, a novel she'd opened to occupy herself. She slowly closed the cover and looked at Madison, her face impassive but her eyes shining with piercing intensity. "You know, Miss Clark," she said calmly, "what shocks me most is not that you humiliated me. I am used to these kinds of looks and words." Madison hung her head in shame. "What shocks me," Olivia continued, is that you're wearing a uniform. This uniform means you represent my company. Every passenger who boards places a little trust in you. And you chose to judge a customer on her appearance, before even saying hello properly. A heavy silence fell. Nearby passengers listened attentively, some nodding their heads gently, agreeing with every word. Today, it's me. But tomorrow, it could be another woman. A man. A child. An elderly person. You don't know the weight your words can have on someone who doesn't have the shoulders to stay calm like me. You could have broken someone more fragile than me. Madison felt tears well up. Her throat tightened, unable to respond. Olivia continued, her voice still soft but firm. Respect, Miss Clark, costs nothing. But its absence can cost you dearly. To you, and to the company you represent. Then she opened her book again, as if the conversation was over. Madison backed away slowly, her cheeks moist, aware that Olivia hadn't just humiliated her in return. She'd taught her a life lesson she'd never forget. The flight continued in apparent calm, but the incident was not confined to the cabin. Several passengers had filmed the scene and, taking advantage of the onboard Wi-Fi, had already posted the videos on social media. The images were clear, a flight attendant humiliating a black woman in first class, then discovering that the woman was actually the owner of the airline. Within an hour, the videos had exploded on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Hashtags such as #RespectOlivia, #RacismInHighlights, and #JusticeInTheAir were trending worldwide. Millions of views were racking up before the plane even landed. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the whispers continued. Passengers were already showing their screens to their neighbors, shocked to see that the story they had just experienced was going viral. Madison, however, understood. Every glance at her was a cruel reminder. I became the face of shame. Her hands shook as she served the trays, and she carefully avoided meeting Olivia's gaze. A man in a suit, probably a lawyer, whispered in a low voice to his neighbor. This story will cost the company dearly, but ultimately, it may be the best advertisement for Mrs. Johnson. She has just shown everyone what true dignity means. For her part, Olivia remained silent. She knew. She knew that, as soon as they landed, the reporters would be there. That this story would take on national, perhaps international, proportions. But she wasn't seeking revenge. Her goal was greater, to let the truth speak for itself. And this truth had already begun to circulate throughout the world. As the plane continued its route to Los Angeles, Madison no longer recognized her own body. Every movement felt heavy, every breath labored. She was no longer the confident woman who, just hours earlier, had looked down on the passengers. She was nothing more than a trembling uniform, trapped by her own pride. She had taken refuge for a few minutes in the galley, at the back of the plane. Leaning against the metal counter, she looked at herself in the small mirror hanging near the cupboards. Her perfect makeup had given way to drawn features, her reddened eyes betraying her fear. How did I get here, she thought, why did I think that humiliating this woman would make me more important? She thought back to her early years as a flight attendant. Back then, she genuinely wanted to help people, make passengers smile, and proudly represent the company. But with time, fatigue, long hours, and above all, her unquestioned prejudices, she had changed. She had begun to divide travelers into good customers and second-class passengers. And today, that contempt had destroyed her. Her heart sank as she imagined the scene upon landing, the cameras, the reporters, maybe even the airline's superiors. Her name, her face, everything would be exposed. She risked suspension, perhaps termination. But beyond that, she had lost something far more precious, her integrity. A colleague entered the galley, found her pale, and asked her gently. "How are you, Madison?" She nodded, unable to answer. In his mind, a sentence from Olivia still resonated, relentless. Respect costs nothing. But its absence can be very costly. Madison finally realized that it wasn't just her career that was faltering, but the person she had become. The silence in the cabin had a solemn, almost surreal quality. All eyes were on Angela, who now stood with quiet confidence, ready to reveal what the stewardess, and indeed most of the passengers, were unaware of. "You want to know who I am?" she asked in a firm but calm voice, her eyes shining with an intensity that betrayed both pain and dignity. The flight attendant, still frozen, crossed her arms to give the impression of remaining in control, but a dull worry clouded her face. "Yes, go ahead." "We're listening," she replied curtly, but her words trembled. Angela took a deep breath, scanned the cabin, and then continued. "My name is Angela Williams. I'm a civil rights lawyer. I'm also the president of an international organization that fights discrimination and abuse of power. And I'm telling you that this flight, which you thought was trivial, is actually under my supervision." A shocked murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers applauded quietly, others widened their eyes, as if they had just witnessed a spectacular reversal of power. The hostess took a step back, unsettled. Her arrogance cracked, revealing the beginnings of panic. This can't be, you're making this up," she blurted out awkwardly. Angela, unperturbed, took an official badge from her purse, with her name and title clearly visible. The organization's gold seal gleamed under the artificial lights of the cabin. "I never lie when it comes to justice," she said calmly. At that moment, the captain, alerted by the tension, entered the main cabin. Seeing the badge, he froze, then turned to the flight attendant with a grave face. "You have made a very serious mistake," he said in a cold voice. The passengers, galvanized, burst into applause, breaking the heavy silence. Some took out their phones to film the scene, already aware that they had just witnessed a moment that would be shared across the country. Angela, still upright and dignified, concluded in a clear voice. "I was humiliated today. But this humiliation doesn't destroy me, it strengthens me. And I will make sure that no other black woman, no passenger, goes through what I endured." The hostess, pale as a sheet, lowered her head, crushed by the weight of her own actions. The silence on board the plane was so thick you could have heard a pin drop. Every passenger, every flight attendant, and even the co-pilot, who had briefly left his station, watched the scene. Claire, the flight attendant who had humiliated Diane a few hours earlier, stood there, petrified, her face drained of all color. Diane calmly rose from her seat, adjusted her elegant coat, and took out an official badge she kept in her bag. Her voice, calm and clear, echoed through the cabin. "I'm Diane Johnson, Executive Director of the U.S. Air Transport Commission. My role is to oversee safety standards and customer service policies across all airlines in this country." A murmur rippled through the cabin. The passengers exchanged glances in shock. Several took out their phones to film. Claire, on the other hand, opened her mouth without a sound coming out, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what she had just unleashed. Diane continued, still calmly but this time with implacable firmness. "What I experienced today is not just personal humiliation. It is abuse, a blatant example of racism and unprofessionalism. And I assure you, Miss Claire, that your actions will have consequences." The purser awkwardly tried to calm the situation, but Diane raised her hand, stopping her immediately. "No. It is time for everyone here to understand that respect is not negotiable, that it does not depend on skin color, appearance, or social status." The passengers applauded, some standing in support of Diane. Claire, meanwhile, felt her legs weaken. She realized that in a few moments, her career had changed. When the plane finally landed, Diane was greeted by a delegation of journalists and airline officials. As a devastated Claire watched, Diane exited with dignity, escorted, while cameras captured every moment. The news spread across the country within hours. Racist flight attendant humiliates black woman, finds out she's the national director of air transportation. Claire, consumed by shame and fear of repercussions, learned the lesson too late. Arrogance and contempt have never protected anyone, but respect opens all doors.